All right. This is underground recording take 2 with Alex Sons because last week didn't work. We're in studio together.
In person, it's real.
Welcome back, Kansas City Underground, to this week's episode of the podcast where we're interviewing hub directors in Kansas City. So Alex Sons is here. And last week when we tried this recording, I called him regular contributor only to find out this is his first time on.
First time, baby.
But technically, we recorded once already. So this is your second time, sort of. But first time they're hearing you. So anyway, enough rambling. Let me do an introduction.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we're doing this series where we want to just introduce listeners, people in Kansas City, those outside of the city, to the different hub teams. We've interviewed different hub leaders, but we've never said, hey, let's talk about your hub. So a hub in the Kansas City Underground is a catalytic team. It's made up of multiple different leaders who are thinking about equipping everyday disciple makers, microchurches, and they're part of the bigger network across the city. And Corey and I were talking, it was like, we need to just spend some time really making sure like people know, who are these people? What do these hubs bring to the table, if you will? What are the stories that they're sharing? What's the unique flavor that they have? So we're doing this in the first part of 2025. I just timestamped this thing. Oh, well. So anyway, today we get to interview Alex Sons with the Rock Island Hub. So Alex, tell us who you are. Let's start with that.
My name is Alex, and I'm a part of the Rock Island Hub.
You got to get close to the microphone.
And farther. There I am. Is that better?
Yeah.
All right.
Things we should have checked before we started.
That's okay. It happens to the best of us. But some of us twice. My name's Alex. I am a part of the Rock Island Hub. We're about 3 years old, and we're over on the Missouri side, the better side of Kansas City. And we were kind of birthed out of my desire to do something special in Raytown. Like, I just went through a pretty hard church breakup, and I felt this real sense from God that we needed to start something in Raytown. And this was about 2019. And that's when I started learning about church planning, sort of just traditional church planning. I got really excited about that. And then a mentor told me to hang out with the guys at Kansas City Underground, and I was never the same. It broke my brain in all kinds of ways. And so my sort of ministry journey, I started leading worship when I was a teenager and did a lot of youth ministry roles. And then somehow got this real bug for disciple making and the everyday person in homes and coffee shops and through businesses. And that's where we're at now.
All right, let's go back a little further. So
yeah,
let's take it back to like, you're from here. Yep. Like this is home.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little bit of the backstory of Alex.
Yeah. And one of the first people in my family, me and a cousin of mine were born about 2 months apart, to be born here in Kansas City.
Okay.
The rest of my family's from Southern Illinois.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
All right.
All from sort of small town, Southern Illinois. And my dad moved out here with my mom. And then I was sort of the first person that's not from Southern Illinois in my family. And then slowly over the years, the rest of the family trickled in to come live with the grandkids and be in Kansas City, the best city in the world. So,
all right.
Yeah, I love Kansas City. I can't think of a better place. I really think it's the best city in the world, even if it's crazy.
All right. So your family moved here, you're born here, jump to like, formative years. Like, who are you?
As far as faith goes, we started attending church when I was about 6 or 7. My great grandma passed, and my family just kind of started going to church so my grandpa wouldn't sit by himself. And it was just a small Southern Baptist church. And so I started learning about who Jesus was in Sunday school classes and did the whole traditional get saved, get baptized. I'm like 8 years old. And then as a teenager, I remember I was probably 9 or 10. I had written for a school project. They asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had written that I wanted to be a pastor. I don't even know why at that point I wrote that.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah, you're learning a lot. And my great-grandfather gave me $100 bill because he was so proud of me. I said I wanted to be a pastor at school.
Just go ahead and reinforce,
Yeah.
like, hey, we're going to pay them.
Yeah. And that was the last time that was kind of the reaction to ministry.
Okay,
That
yeah,
it was
yeah.
going to be fruitful and awesome. And people are going to throw money at you because you said that. That was a bad start. I got a really bad idea.
Yeah.
But then as a teenager, I started going to the camps, and I remember just having like a real like radical encounter with Jesus, and that I had to do something about it. So really, my entirety of like my teenage years, the entire time I really just wanted to be a pastor. And I played a lot of music. I played in a blues rock band, and it was through that I got involved with the first church plant I was a part of. My drummer was a pastor. My guitar player was the worship leader of this little church plant in a strip mall, about 30, 40 people. And I was 17 years old when I left the church I had grown up in to go lead worship with them. And kind of out of nowhere, within a couple weeks, we had merged with this older Presbyterian church. And I'm 17 years old, and I'm supposed to be leading a team of like 35 people, and they're all my parents' age or older. And I just kind of got thrown into the wolves, but I had a real love for missional ministry.
Okay. Yeah.
Starts to make a difference in the lives of people who aren't in your church building.
Mm-hmm.
And that really started over those first several years when I was 17, 18, 19. God started to really plant that.
Okay. Cool, man. So let's get back into like, fast forward a few years. You talked about a mentor that said, needed to hang out with us. Like, what was happening in that season? Let's talk about that guy.
I was at a church planning resident at a church over by me. And essentially my residency was to hang out with this guy named Dan Sutherland.
Shout out to Dan Sutherland.
Shout out Dan Sutherland. I miss you dearly.
Yeah, we all do.
And so every couple of weeks I would go have a cigar and hang out with Dan. And he would really, really push, like, where's your focus on disciple making if you're going to plant a church? And he eventually got pretty specific and started asking me questions about church models. And I remember the sort of statement, I can only paraphrase, I don't remember exactly how he said it, that really changed the way I thought about ministry, was he described two ways that I could plant a church. He said I could plant a church the way it's been done for the last 30, 40 years, and we can build a crowd and then try and make disciples out of them. And he said, or you can make disciples and watch the church emerge. And he asked me that question like there wasn't a right answer.
Yeah. It's wide open to where you might go.
He's like, either one works. You just let me know which one you want to do. And I realized in that moment, I don't want to do what I thought I wanted to do, which is build a big church, have a cool building, cool programs, really nice music, and try and make a difference. That I realized that the real difference I could make is by being a disciple that makes disciples, and this sort of grassroots style of ministry that we read in Acts. And so from there, he said I had to hang out with Rob Wegner and Brian Johnson. And I sent Rob a Facebook message. And I said, I just really wanted to learn about this microchurch stuff. And he said, this may be a little odd, but do you want to just come hang out in my backyard on Thursday?
Yeah. It's surprising that he actually responded to you through Facebook.
It took a while. A while. I did. And I remember driving home from that night after hearing all the stories of what God's doing in Kansas City Underground and just realizing I don't want to do anything else. And it was scary because it was a higher likelihood that I would be broke. It's not near as easy, but I just knew I didn't want to do anything else. And we've been trying to figure it out ever since.
Yeah. So I guess we started having conversations about like, hey, how does this become its own interdependent hub in Raytown that exists within this network? You're in a different part of the city. You've already got sort of a core team that you've been building. Because, I mean, you were planting in a traditional sense.
Yeah, we were in the process.
And then you made a turn.
Yeah, we were about 3-4 months before we were really supposed to launch Sunday, do all that stuff. when we started thinking, I don't know if we want to do it this way. And so, I mean, but that kind of it probably took a year and a half of figuring out, what do we want to do? Like, we're making this radical shift into smaller environments, disciple making, missionary equipping. And I mean, it took a long time for us to, probably took a year and a half, 2 years for us to even just understand, like, okay, this is what we want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you got to take a whole core group of people who are going this way and retrain them to go a different way.
Yeah.
Like, what was that like with them?
Hard. And I mean, I would say about half of them said, yeah, this is awesome. Let's do it. And the other half of them also said it was awesome until we kind of started doing it. I don't know if I want to do this.
Yeah.
I thought you were supposed to be my pastor.
Yeah.
And preach really good. And then you can talk to my friends about Jesus. And so it was a lot of pain. It was pretty tough. I learned a lot about myself in that season. And in some ways, I'm kind of shocked that I'm still doing it after like that big transition, because it took a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And it still is.
Yeah.
I mean, we still regularly hang and go, what's happening? How's it going? And choosing to do a different paradigm is always going to be difficult because I mean, this is important for those that are listening that are outside the city that are always asking the question, can you do both? Can you do hybrid? Like, yeah, there's probably, some things you can incorporate, but like if you're going to do a whole paradigm shift, which we'll hear this from the serve team as well, you're taking people that have certain expectations and they're importing those expectations and you're going, those don't fit here anymore. And now what you expected of me, we all expect of each other. And we're all going to be shepherding people and we're going to be sharing this and we're sharing a dream for the sake of our city, not just building this one little thing. Yeah. All right. So let's do this. So Raytown, but the name of the hub is Rock Island. Can you explain that real quick?
Yeah. So we were trying to figure out like church names. It's got to be cool. It's got to be catchy. And I couldn't think of anything. And in Raytown, there is this old railroad corridor. Raytown's right next to the stadiums where the NFL World Champions
Slide
play.
that in there.
The best football team in the world and the best football player of all time. I'll say it. It's okay. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Play. And there's a corridor that goes all the way from there. It goes past there. But they took this corridor that goes there and they created a trail that connects with the Katy Trail all the way to St. Louis. So there's this trail that went from the stadiums, went right through the middle of Raytown, and goes all the way to St. Louis on the other side of the state. And it kind of became the coolest thing in town. Like, Raytown is a tiny little suburb. Kansas City has tried to annex Raytown a million times. I mean, before they put the zoo where they did, Raytown was supposed to be the zoo. Like, there are plenty of stories. It's just this little landlocked suburb right outside of Kansas City. And this trail brought a whole bunch of life to it. And there was bikers and people walking their dogs. My wife walks our dog with her mom on that trail every single day.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was looking at the trail and there's a little coffee cart and it said Rock Island Coffee. And I looked at it and I was like, Rock Island Church.
Yeah,
That's it. And the more I thought about it and the more I prayed about it, it had this connective sense to it. That the trail was connecting the city and people in a way that nothing else in the city really had in a while. People were meeting their neighbors. They were smiling at each other in a time in 2021 where you didn't even really get around each other.
Mm.
And that was my dream for the city as well.
Mm.
It paints this picture of this region. And we eventually found this sort of mission statement and this idea of, we want to see every home fully alive with the good news of Jesus. And when you walk the trail, you see so many homes. You're in people's backyards, and then you're in the woods, and then you're in a neighborhood. And it became this sort of symbol for me of what Jesus can do in our city.
That's good. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, we're going to ask, like, everybody, all these different hub teams, like, hey, tell us the history, glimpse of your hub.
Yeah.
Second question, even though I've asked a bunch of questions, second main question, what are we said a snapshot of kingdom activity. So what are the stories that you're sharing that you can share?
I think our hub, what we've found over the last year or so, is in that sort of pruning process, trying to figure out who we are over those 3 years we've existed. I think two main themes have really rose to the top and sort of passions of our people. And one of them is new ventures, new businesses, nonprofits that bring life to the city. And the other one is the restoration of families. I would say half of our hub leaders, like the 30 to 50 that we have, I would say half of them are my family.
Yeah.
Between mine and my wife's. And that's not normal, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love it. And a ton of the other ones, we had a sort of a vision casting day a couple months ago where we were at a gathering, and I had really encouraged our people to write down their dreams for the next year. And I would say about half of them were the idea of, I want to restore relationships with my siblings or my parents or my cousins, and I want my family to know Jesus. And then half of them were, I want to start this business that does this, or I want to start a paint and sip where we can add elements of worship and discovery into it, or I want to start a nonprofit where we can help to buy dentures for everyday folks. And it felt like there were these two main themes. And I'm saying all that to say we're already seeing God break through in some of those places, or where I think the story, sort of missionary story that we have that makes my heart the warmest, is a lady named Linda, who I love dearly. And Linda, her grandsons, I was their youth pastor at a previous church. And so when they saw that we were having gatherings on Sundays, she shows up. She's like, oh, it's going to be a church. And then every time somebody shows up to one of our gatherings, I'm really nervous. Sometimes they're like almost completely full of listening prayer, or I'm giving them missional tools. And it's like, this is not probably what you were looking for. And I got to get over that. But Linda, she stuck through, and over the last year, she has had 3 significant gospel conversations with 3 different people in her family, all centered around like medical needs and prayer for healing. And I believe she's had 3 people give their lives to Jesus just with her.
Wow.
In a year. And so I remember just a couple weeks ago, I was at a microchurch gathering with Linda, and we were talking about the Kansas City Underground. She was just now kind of learning about it, that there was more than just our little group of people.
Yeah.
And she was telling me about how she spent her whole life thinking that her job as a Christian was to go to church. And she realizes the responsibility and purpose that God has given her. And that just in this last year, she's been confident to have gospel conversations with her brother and her sister-in-law and her neighbor. And she's seen people come to Jesus in hospital rooms and over the fence, literally, over the last year. And she just keeps showing up and saying, I've got a cool story. And I just kind of buckle in. I'm like, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And Linda's a beautiful example of what God is doing in families in Rock Island.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. Like I thought about that actually when you said, like half the leaders are part of your family in some way. And then there's this entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
In fact, the third question is, what's your unique flavor? And I would say it's probably both of those things.
Yeah.
And it's because you model that, they're like the people that are connecting are reflecting some of what they see. Like, man, this is like the Son's family in some way. Like it looks whole and healthy, and we want that in our own family. But then there's that entrepreneurial spirit underneath. So it's like I love that you told that story that connects what people are saying they long for, but also is happening.
I think I try to think a lot over the last couple weeks. Is that because of me? But I really do also think that God has put a lot of that stuff in me because he knew about the group in Rock Island.
Yeah. Yeah, it's both.
I think it is.
Yeah. And it's what Jesus longs for all of us.
Because what my fear is my voice too loud? But God is really doing these things. Like we've seen 3-4 new businesses start over the last year. And we're trying to get a nonprofit going that does that. We don't even have the thing rolling yet. We're already seeing fruit of it. And Melody and I, my wife, Melody, we're very, very intentional about our families. And Melody's family has went through a lot of loss. And as a result, they cling to each other. And I've always been really, really, I wish my extended family was more like that. And so I try and make it a point where things like Chiefs games, I don't really watch Chiefs games with friends. That every single week, I'm going to make sure I'm watching the Chiefs game with my brothers and my father-in-law and my dad. And that means I say no to a lot of people. That means a lot of people are like having people over for the Chiefs game. We've got 15 people in my tiny living room with our family. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's cultivated too.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
yeah, you're paying attention to make it happen, yeah.
But I also, in the same way, I think God has used that for us to be especially equipped to help walk other families through that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, there's one other question I want to get from you, which is you're one of the few hubs that has like really regular weekly gatherings. When we launched 6 years ago-ish, we would do maybe 3 out of 4 Sundays a month, maybe. Some months it was 2. Some months it was 4.
Yeah.
Some months we just said it's average 3 out of 4. And we're teaching through Missionary Pathway. We're teaching through, or not teaching, we're equipping in those things. We're doing tools. We're following up on I will statements. Like you said, people show up and it's like, I hope this is sort of meeting some expectation, but it's probably not like church that you've been a part of. So that relationship with Sutherland keeps going, and there's like a mentoring thing still happening. And you're talking about, at least this is the way I remember you telling me the story.
Yeah.
You know, you're considering like, what would weekly gatherings look like for us? Is it important to have? And you landed like on some rhythms. Talk about that just so people can hear, like, some hub teams do gather weekly.
Yeah, you talked earlier about this idea of is a hybrid model possible. I actually think we're doing it, but it's not the way we thought we would.
Yeah.
And we kind of had to let it die before it actually worked. And what we landed on was we need to create a space. We needed in that season sort of a weekly space for the folks who know that they want something different than churches they've known it their whole lives, but they're also not all the way on the other side and ready yet. And it's going to take some time to equip and to pray. And for that sort of paradigm shift, it takes a long time. And that was most of our people, I would say.
Yeah.
If not all of them.
Yeah.
And we knew that they were looking for something new and not churches they've always known it, because they wouldn't be hanging out with us if they were. But we also knew they didn't really feel quite equipped to just go do it. And so we thought through, I was working with Deanne and some others about some rhythms and how we could create a Sunday gathering that felt close to churches we've always known it, but was really focused on pushing people out into their missional spaces. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways we settled in on that is out of the 4 weeks every month, we have a themed week. And so the first week of every month, we call it our Good News Sunday. And it's kind of your traditional worship service. We sing a couple songs. I usually share a story from the Gospels and of Jesus's life. And then we'll have a response moment. And that's it. And I don't teach more than 20 minutes. We start 5 minutes late and we're done by 10:45. They're quick. I feel guilty sometimes. Like, did I prepare enough for this? Probably could squeeze a little more out of that. And that is just sort of a place to refresh, hear the gospel, and be encouraged by what God does. Second week of every month is a prayer Sunday. We spend it almost exclusively on prayer tools. And so, for example, a couple weeks ago, we walked through the Lord's Prayer as Jesus shares on the Sermon on the Mount, and how prayer goes from worship to and contemplative prayer to missional prayer on earth as it is in heaven, to praying for our needs, daily bread, to praying for forgiveness of self and others, and to praying for God's provision, lead us not into temptation. And how in this tiny prayer, and so we walked through and everyone took notes. Like when we start with prayer, we start with worship, write 3 things about God's character. We take 5 minutes and we listen. And we did that each time. And so sometimes I'm up there and I'm still guiding some, or somebody else is guiding some. But it's pretty awkward because there's a lot of silence in between. And I remember when we first started, my mom would ask which week it is because she thought the prayer weeks were always pretty awkward. She's like, I'll help out with the kids. And now she loves it.
Yeah.
But it took some time.
Yeah.
3rd week of every month, we share stories of what God is doing in the network and in our hub. And we want to share stories of everyday people that are making disciples and seeing the beauty, justice, and good news of Jesus in these tiny slices of Kansas City, to encourage people and show them that even if it's rough for you right now in your missional context, God is still working and moving.
Mm.
And I know for me, that's been some of the biggest encouragement, even as a hub, when I'm able to hear other hubs when we meet talk about the great things that are happening. And I'm like, I'm not feeling like anything good is happening right now.
Yeah.
It almost all feels bad. But then Morgan can share things about Serve, and Corey can share things about 0 Hour.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, we're fine. That'll happen for us. And we want to do that same thing with our missionary disciple makers.
That's right.
And so that's week 3. We share stories. And week 4, we give a missional tool. And so some weeks, probably every 3-4 months, we just do a DBS because that's one of the most important tools
Right.
that we use for discovery. And so we'll probably have 20, 30 people at a service. We'll split them up into 2-3 groups of 10. And other weeks we've been going through just tiny portions of the blessed rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
So last month we talked about eat and the blessed rhythms and what it means to invite people to the table, especially we're going into the holiday season. So we talked about the importance of the table and family and those who don't have family, and how can we be missionary disciple makers and invite people in. And even when we're sharing stories from the gospel or sharing stories from the network, there's always an actionable step at the end of obedience.
Yeah.
In a response moment. And I'll actually say once we started gathering like this, we started to see things really sort of take off in tiny places. Like we've seen 3-4 new discovery groups started in the last 6 months. Some of them are already these fully formed, beautiful expressions of the church. We're seeing stories like Linda. Yeah. All 3 of those stories she started hanging out with us when we started meeting regularly. It works. It's working.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it feels weird because every week is so structured in a different way, but unstructured. But it's really working. I'm kind of shocked sometimes.
That's cool, man. All right. So last 2 to 3 minutes, like being a part of the network, what's it doing for you?
Yeah.
And that is not a question to go, hey, let's pat the network on the back. But like, what does it mean to be a part of the bigger network? I mean, you kind of already mentioned something, hearing from these other hub directors was helpful for you, but like you didn't anticipate this when you were first thinking about, I'm going to plant a church.
Yeah. Kansas City Underground has given me a family that gets me. Where any other ministry context, I kind of felt like I was just always stirring the pot.
You're part of the weirdos now.
Yeah, I am. And so that's the biggest gift the Underground has given us is, look, we're still pretty lonely because Kansas City is big and we're all very far away from each other.
Yeah.
And I wish we could all be in the same neighborhood, but then we'd lose who we are.
Yeah.
But it's given us a family and guys I can call and cry with, and there's a list of them. And I think that's been the biggest thing that Kansas City Underground is people that get me. I'm not weird. I'm not crazy. I am weird and crazy, but we're all crazy together.
Yeah.
And that's been the importance of a network for us.
Yeah.
That and just being able, like I said, to rally around others when things seem bleak for us, and for us to be able to do the same for them.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks for coming and hanging, man. I'm loving this whole idea of getting all these stories out there for us to go, this is who you are, and this is who we are, and this is us together. So hope you all will tune in, keep listening to these podcasts, get to know a little bit more of these hub directors. And if you're in Kansas City and you're like, I'm near Raytown, I want to know what's going on with the Rock Island Hub, how do they find you?
You can go to rockislandchurch.org, and that's the best place to find us.
Alex at
That's a great way too. Alex at rockislandchurch.org.
There we go. So if you're in the Raytown area close to it, look up Alex, jump in. This is our hope, so that people know, like, oh, there's a hub near me. There's a team of people that are thinking this way for the sake of bringing beauty, justice, and good news to Kansas City. We'll see you next week.